There's this growing movement to empower people through language they can understand.
And the Magna Carta is a great example.
Right.
Even though it was written in Latin, it laid the groundwork for clearer legal rights. But how its principles spread to more people is what's fascinating.
Yeah.
They were translated and simplified for wider distribution.
It wasn't enough for those ideas
Right.
to just exist in a document written in a language only the elite could understand.
Yeah.
They needed to reach the people.
Welcome to the Clear Write Podcast, the place where we explore the science of communication. I'm your host. Before we get started, make sure to check out the newest Clear Write training for plain language. Clear Write certification helps professionals like you write clear, effective, and user-centered documents that meet ISO 24495 standards for plain language. If your job relies on communicating, you need these skills to create clear, compelling, and actionable writing. Don't leave your writing to chance. Get Clear Write certification, and upgrade your career. The training includes an online self-paced course, 1 year of plain language certification, plus 1 year of bonus micro lessons and updates. So what are you waiting for? Go to clearwrite.online and get started today. Okay, let's get down to business. I'm thrilled to have our special AI guests from Notebook LM joining us today.
Today, we're going way back in time.
Oh, wow.
To explore the history of plain language.
Okay.
You might be surprised to learn just how far back efforts to communicate clearly actually go.
It's true.
Yeah.
The quest for clarity in communication
Yeah.
is not new, and it's much more fascinating than it might sound at first.
We're diving deep into an article by Nathan Booker,
Okay.
a certified plain language instructor,
Oh, wow.
called Plain Language Training: What is the History of Plain Language?
Mm-hmm.
He really takes us on a journey from ancient times right into the digital age.
Yeah.
This article was freshly published on November 21st of this year,
Oh, wow.
so it's hot off the press.
And what's striking is how plain language is about so much more than just writing simply.
Right.
Booker connected to major historical shifts and even how our brains work.
Yeah.
It's about accessibility, understanding, and ultimately empowerment.
I love that.
Yeah.
Empowerment. And it all starts with some pretty ancient examples that I bet will surprise you.
Okay.
I mean, have you ever thought about plain language in the context of 1754 BCE?
Probably not.
Yeah.
But the Code of Hammurabi is
Yeah.
a fantastic example.
Okay.
It was literally carved in stone for all to see.
Wow.
Those laws needed to be understood by everyone, regardless of their reading ability.
That makes total sense.
Yeah,
It had to be direct and to the point.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where that famous an eye for an eye comes from.
Right.
It's plain language. Even if it sounds harsh to modern ears,
Yeah.
the meaning was crystal clear.
Clarity was key.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if they consciously thought about
Well, yeah.
making the laws clear and accessible for everyone back then.
It's hard to say for sure,
Right.
of course.
Yeah.
But we see similar efforts in other ancient cultures.
Okay.
Think about the Rosetta Stone
Okay.
from 196 BCE.
Oh, good point.
That's an early example of understanding the importance of translating information
Right.
for different audiences.
It's like a very early version of tailoring your message.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure everyone could understand the decree no matter what language they spoke.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It reinforces the idea that plain language is about breaking down barriers to understanding.
Right.
And you can even see this in religious texts. The Ten Commandments, for example,
Okay.
are incredibly direct.
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not steal.
Right.
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
There's no ambiguity there.
It's almost like they anticipated Twitter's character limit thousands of years in advance.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But it does show that even when language was often elaborate and symbolic,
Yeah.
they understood the power of simplicity in conveying important messages.
So we see that even way back then.
Yeah.
There was this push and pull between complex language and the need for clear communication.
Yeah.
But as we move into the medieval period,
Okay.
things start to shift in a really interesting way, don't they?
Yes, we start to see a more conscious effort
Okay.
to make information accessible to wider audiences. Latin was still the dominant language of power,
Right.
but there's this growing movement
Okay.
to empower people through language they can understand.
And the Magna Carta is a great example.
Right.
Even though it was written in Latin,
Okay.
It laid the groundwork for clearer legal rights,
Mm-hmm.
but how its principles spread to more people is what's fascinating.
Yeah.
They were translated and simplified
Okay.
for wider distribution.
It wasn't enough for those ideas to
Right.
just exist in a document written in a language only the elite could understand.
Yeah.
They needed to reach the people.
And then you have the Wycliffe Bible in the 1380s,
Yes.
which was a game changer.
Huge.
Translating the Bible into English allowed people to engage with Scripture directly without relying on interpretations from the church.
Absolutely.
Now, that's what I call empowering. Imagine how impactful that must have been at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Giving people the ability to read and interpret the Bible for themselves.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It was a huge step towards literacy and individual understanding of religious texts.
Right.
And then there's Chaucer's Canterbury Tales,
Okay.
which was written in Middle English,
Okay.
the language of everyday people.
It's interesting how even literature played a role in this shift towards greater accessibility.
Yeah.
Chaucer was a brilliant storyteller,
He was.
but he also seemed to understand the power of connecting with a wider audience through their language.
He certainly did.
Yeah.
And all of this laid the groundwork for what was to come.
Because things really started to take off during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those were pivotal moments in history where reason and knowledge were emphasized,
Right.
which naturally boosted the push for plain language.
And Thomas Paine's common sense perfectly embodies this. It wasn't just his arguments for American independence that made it so influential, but how he wrote them.
He deliberately wrote in plain, straightforward language,
Yeah.
making his ideas accessible to a broad audience, regardless of their education.
It's a brilliant example of using plain language to persuade and mobilize people.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating how the way something is written can be just as important as the content itself.
Why so?
And even though the Federalist Papers were intended for a more educated audience, they still aimed for clarity when explaining the complexities of the U.S. Constitution.
Their goal was to educate and convince people about the benefits of the proposed system of government.
Yeah.
So clarity was essential.
And even the scientific revolution contributed to this trend.
It did.
Now, this is where things get really interesting to me.
Okay.
How do scientists like Galileo and Newton fit into this story of plain language?
That's a great question.
They were dealing with incredibly complex ideas.
Think about it. They needed to translate their discoveries into language that artisans and engineers could understand to put those discoveries into practice.
Okay.
They were bridging the gap between complex scientific concepts and practical applications.
So plain language wasn't just about spreading ideas.
Right.
It was about making those ideas usable in the real world.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is.
And then, boom, the 19th century hits, and the need for clear communication explodes.
The Industrial Revolution and the rise of mass education changed everything.
Yeah.
Laws and science had to adapt to a much larger, more literate public.
The UK Patent Acts of 1852 are a perfect example.
Okay.
They demanded that inventions be described clearly, which makes perfect sense when you consider the rapid pace of innovation.
Imagine trying to get a patent for something revolutionary.
Right.
If you couldn't explain what it was or how it worked clearly.
Clarity became crucial for progress.
It did.
And then you have Darwin tackling something as groundbreaking as the theory of evolution on the origin of species. That must have been a monumental challenge.
It was a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
But Darwin was a gifted communicator.
Yeah.
And he knew he had to make his ideas understandable to a wide audience, many of whom were skeptical.
He couldn't rely on jargon or overly complex explanations.
No.
He had to break down complex scientific concepts into language people could grasp.
He did that.
And when you think about it,
Yeah.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation is another powerful example.
It is.
That direct language,
Powerful.
all persons held as slaves are, and henceforward shall be free, is plain language at its most impactful.
Absolutely.
There's no mistaking what he was saying.
Right.
And that clarity played a crucial role in its power and legacy.
It did.
It's clear that plain language has been woven into the fabric of history, but the 20th century is when it really becomes a movement.
You're absolutely right. And that's where we'll pick up next.
To wrap things up, I want to give you 2 challenges. 1, there's a link to the full article in the podcast description. Go there and take a look. It's a great read and has links to all the resources mentioned in this episode. Here's challenge number 2. Find one item from the article that you want to apply today and let me know what you tried. You can DM me at X or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how it works. Well, that wraps up today's episode. Thanks again for joining us at the Clear Right Podcast. If you like this episode, please make sure to like us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, and share the podcast with your coworkers. Until next time, have an amazing day.